The phone screen glowed with another one-star review, then another, each notification a fresh knife twist as Victoria Turner watched her bakery's rating plummet from 4.8 stars to 2.9 in less than 20 minutes. She recognized Marcus's writing style in every fabricated complaint. Stale croissants, rude service, found a hair in my coffee cake. Each lie polished to sound authentic, each timestamp minutes apart, each profile clearly fake. Her hands trembled as she set the phone face down on the empty display counter, surrounded by perfectly golden morning pastries that no one would buy now. The lease renewal sat unsigned beside the register. Mrs. Chen wanted an answer by noon. Victoria looked around the small shop she'd built from nothing after culinary school, the sage green walls she'd painted herself, the vintage light fixtures she'd hunted down at estate sales, the smell of brown butter and vanilla that had become her whole world. 3 years of 16-hour days, 3 years of perfecting recipes her grandmother had taught her, adding her own touches, building something that mattered. Marcus couldn't stand that she'd succeeded after their breakup, couldn't stand that she'd chosen her dream over following him to Seattle for his tech job. So now he was destroying it from 2 states away, one fabricated review at a time. The door chimed. Victoria looked up, forcing her customer service face into place, even though her eyes burned with unshed tears. Then the words died in her throat. The man who entered looked like he'd stepped out of a period painting, all sharp, elegant lines and otherworldly presence. His hair fell white as fresh snow past his shoulders, contrasting starkly against his black coat. His skin held the same pale luminescence, smooth and ageless. When he moved, it was with a fluid grace that made the air itself seem to part for him. But his eyes caught her most, dark as midnight, yet somehow warm when they met hers. "Good morning," he said, his voice carrying an accent she couldn't quite place, something old world and refined. "I hope I'm not too early." "We're open." Victoria smoothed her apron, suddenly conscious of the flour dusting her forearms, the messy bun barely containing her dark hair. "What can I get you?" He approached the display case with genuine interest, studying each pastry like it was a work of art. His attention lingered on her specialty items, the lavender honey croissants, the brown butter cardamom rolls, the dark chocolate scones with sea salt. "These are all made this morning?" he asked. "Before sunrise?" She'd been awake since 3, kneading dough while the city slept, trying not to think about the reviews, the lease, the slow collapse of everything she'd built. "I'll take everything." Victoria blinked. "I'm sorry?" "Everything in the case. All of it." He pulled out a black credit card that caught the light strangely. "I'm hosting guests this evening who appreciate fine craft. This seems perfect." That's nearly $200 worth of pastries." He smiled then, and something about it made her pulse quicken, not from fear exactly, though there was something dangerous in that smile, something that suggested he was much more than he appeared. "Then I suppose I should pay you $200. She packed everything carefully, her hands steadier now, focused on the familiar task. He watched her work with an intensity that should have been unsettling, but instead felt almost protective. When she handed him the boxes, their fingers brushed, and his skin was cool against hers. "Thank you," he said. "I'm Alaric, by the way. Alaric Petrova." Victoria Turner. The name felt heavy in her mouth, formal, like they were sealing some kind of pact. "I'll return tomorrow, Victoria Turner. Same order, if you'll have it ready." He was gone before she could respond, the door chiming softly behind him, leaving her alone in the empty shop with enough money to buy herself one more day of hope. That night, she lay awake in her studio apartment above the bakery, scrolling through the fake reviews until the words blurred together. Marcus had created 15 different accounts, 15 separate identities, each one crafted to destroy her. Her lawyer had said review platforms rarely removed posts without concrete proof of fraud, and by the time she could prove anything, the damage would be permanent. She opened her banking app and stared at the deposit from Alaric Petrova. Real money. Real enough to cover today's losses. But tomorrow would bring more reviews, more empty hours, more evidence that Marcus had finally found a way to break her, that she couldn't fight. Unless Alaric really did come back. He arrived at opening the next morning, precisely at 6, when the first light was barely touching the sky. Victoria had prepared the same order, plus a few extra items she'd stayed up late perfecting. She'd chosen pastries that would travel well, that would still taste perfect hours later. Alaric examined each edition with clear pleasure. You didn't have to do this. You're buying my entire stock. Least I can do is make sure it's worth the investment. It is. His certainty settled something in her chest. I have a question, Victoria. A business proposition, if you're open to hearing it. She leaned against the counter, trying to read his expression. In the early morning light, his otherworldly quality was even more pronounced. No one was naturally that pale, that graceful, that ageless looking. But his manner was genuine, his interest in her work clearly real. I'm listening. I represent certain interests in the city. We host gatherings regularly, events that require the finest food and drink. We've been searching for a bakery that could supply us with daytime confections, but most commercial operations lack the artistry we require. He gestured to the boxes she'd prepared. Your work is exceptional. I'd like to offer you an exclusive contract. Daily orders, premium prices, guaranteed payment. Victoria's throat tightened. How much are we talking? He named a figure that would cover her lease for 6 months, for 1 month's work. That's too much, she said automatically, even as her mind screamed at her to shut up and take it. It's exactly right for what I need. But I understand if you require time to consider. This would be a significant commitment. Who do you work for? Alaric tilted his head slightly, studying her. Tell me, Victoria, do you believe in things that exist outside normal understanding? Things that live in the spaces between what most people accept as real? Her pulse jumped. You're asking if I believe in vampires. I'm asking if you could accept working for them. The rational part of her brain insisted this was insane. Vampires weren't real. This was some elaborate setup, or a joke, or a symptom of her stress-induced breakdown. But she looked at Alaric standing in her bakery as dawn light crept across the floor, at the way he stayed carefully in the shadows, at the impossible perfection of his features. And she knew. You're the king, she said quietly. That's why you said you represent interests. You are the interests. His smile was approving, warm despite the sharp canines she could now see clearly. Yes, I rule the court beneath this city and several others across the region. We maintain careful boundaries with the human world, but we also maintain certain standards. Your bakery caught my attention weeks ago. I've been watching to see if the quality was consistent. The reviews, she said suddenly. You know about the reviews. I know your former partner is attempting to destroy your reputation through fraud. I know you've done nothing to deserve it except refuse to sacrifice your dreams for his ego. Alaric stepped closer, and she could feel the contained power radiating from him, ancient and absolute. I also know that an exclusive contract with my court would make his petty sabotage irrelevant. Our patronage is not advertised, but it is known among those who matter. You would never lack for customers again. Why me? There are bigger bakeries, more established places. Because I tasted your lavender honey croissant and understood that you don't simply follow recipes. You create. You care about your craft in a way that's increasingly rare. His dark eyes held hers. And because you deserve better than to watch someone small and cruel take this from you. Victoria felt something shift in her chest, some combination of relief and attraction, and terrified hope. If I say yes, what exactly am I agreeing to? Daily deliveries to my court, discretion about our nature, attendance at certain events where your presence as our supplier would be appropriate, and my protection, for what it's worth. His voice softened on those last words. No one harms what belongs to the court. That would include you. I don't belong to anyone. No, Alaric agreed. You don't. Poor phrasing on my part. But you would be under our protection. There's a difference. She should ask for time to think, should consult a lawyer, research vampire politics, figure out what she was really getting into. But her phone sat on the counter between them, and even now she could see another notification lighting up the screen, another review, another lie, another piece of her dream crumbling. I'll do it, Victoria said. When do we start? Tonight. I'll send a car for you at sunset. Bring samples of your full range and we'll discuss the specific needs of the court. Alaric picked up the boxes she'd prepared, handling them with careful reverence. "And Victoria? Thank you. You have no idea how rare it is to find work like yours." After he left, she pulled up her bakery's review page one more time. 2.4 stars now. Marcus had been busy overnight, but as she stared at the screen, Victoria felt something new rising beneath the fear and exhaustion, something that felt almost like power. Let him post his lies. She had a vampire king for a client now. The car that arrived at sunset was sleek and black, the driver silent and professional. Victoria climbed into the back seat with her carefully packed samples, trying not to feel like she was entering a fairy tale with all the dark implications that carried. They drove through the city as evening fell, past the tourist districts and business centers, down into older neighborhoods where the buildings leaned close together and the streetlights flickered with vintage charm. The car stopped in front of what looked like an abandoned Gothic church, all weathered stone and stained glass dark from the inside. But when the driver opened her door and led her to a side entrance, Victoria saw the truth. The church was a facade. Behind it, built down into the earth itself, was a palace. They descended a sweeping marble staircase lit by crystal chandeliers that threw rainbow light across walls covered in dark velvet and age-darkened paintings. The air smelled of old stone and beeswax candles and something else, something copper-sweet that made her think of blood. Figures moved in the shadows, pale-skinned and graceful, their conversations pausing as she passed. Alaric met her at the bottom of the stairs. He'd changed into more formal attire, a charcoal suit that somehow made him look even more regal, more dangerous. But his smile when he saw her was genuinely warm. "You came. You hired a very punctual driver." He laughed, a sound that seemed to surprise the other vampires watching from doorways and alcoves. "Come. Let me show you where we gather, and you can see what we need." He led her through corridors lined with artwork that belonged in museums, past rooms furnished with antiques that had to be priceless. The palace was a strange mix of historical grandeur and modern comfort, gas lamps alongside subtle electric lighting, period furniture arranged on Persian rugs that glowed with rich color. Everywhere she looked, vampires watched them pass, some with curiosity, others with something harder to read. Disapproval, maybe. Concern. "They're not used to humans here," Alaric said quietly, noticing her tension. "Should I be worried?" "Not while you're with me." It wasn't arrogance in his voice, just simple fact. "But I should be honest with you, Victoria. Bringing you into the court as our official supplier is unconventional. Some of my advisors believe we should maintain stricter separation from human commerce. They'll be watching to see if I've made an error in judgment. So I'm a test case. You're an artist whose work deserves recognition." He stopped in front of tall double doors carved with elaborate patterns. "I don't make decisions lightly, and I don't apologize for supporting excellence. But yes, there will be resistance. I wanted you to understand that before we proceed." Victoria thought about the reviews piling up on her phone, about Marcus sitting in Seattle crafting new lies, about the way her dream had been dissolving day by day. Then she looked at Alaric, at the certainty in his ancient eyes, at the way he'd said your work deserves recognition like it was a fundamental truth. "I can handle resistance," she said. "Show me what you need." The doors opened onto a ballroom that stole her breath. The ceiling soared 3 stories high, painted with celestial scenes in gold leaf and deep blues. More chandeliers cast warm light across a floor that could have held 200 people easily. At one end stood a raised dais with a throne carved from black marble, and Victoria understood with sudden clarity that this was where Alaric ruled, where he held court in the most literal sense. "We host gatherings here twice a week," he explained, leading her across the polished floor. "Political meetings, social events, celebrations. Many include human guests, diplomats, and allies who need to eat actual food rather than just drink wine and make conversation. Currently, we have those meals catered by conventional services, but the quality is mediocre at best. You want me to handle the food service for court events. I want you to create a menu that reflects the elegance of these occasions. Pastries that can be served during evening receptions, desserts that complement wine, small savory items for those who prefer substance. You would have full creative control and a budget limited only by your imagination." Victoria set down her sample boxes on a long table near the dais. Her hands moved automatically, unwrapping each item, arranging them for presentation. The familiar task steadied her racing thoughts. How many people typically attend? Between 50 and 200, depending on the event. And you'd want everything fresh the day of service? I have staff who can handle transport and setup. Your role would be creation and direction. Alaric stood close enough that she could feel the cool air around him, see the way the chandelier light caught in his white hair. I've tasted your work, Victoria. I know what you're capable of. The question is whether you're willing to operate on this scale. She looked around the ballroom, imagining it filled with vampires and human diplomats, her pastries arranged on silver platters, her creations becoming part of this strange, beautiful world beneath the city. It was terrifying. It was impossible. It was exactly what she'd dreamed about in culinary school, before she'd realized that dreams required compromise and sacrifice, and sometimes settling for a small shop that barely paid the bills. I'm willing, she said, but I need a proper kitchen. My current setup isn't designed for production on this level. There are kitchens here in the palace, fully equipped, though rarely used for more than heating blood. He said it casually, but Victoria felt the reminder of what he was, what all of them were. You're welcome to use them, or I can arrange for upgrades to your existing space, whatever serves the work best. I'd need to see your kitchens first, understand what I'm working with. Alaric's smile held approval, and something else, something that made her skin warm. Of course, but first try to relax for a moment. You've been tense since you arrived, and I suspect it's not entirely about the kitchens. Victoria forced herself to take a breath. He was right. Her shoulders were locked tight, her jaw clenched. It's a lot to take in. This morning I was watching my business die. Tonight I'm standing in a vampire palace discussing catering contracts. The cognitive dissonance is pretty extreme. Would it help if I told you that I'm nervous as well? She looked at him skeptically. You're a vampire king. What do you have to be nervous about? That I'm moving too fast. That I'm pushing you into something you're not ready for, because I'm accustomed to making decisions and expecting them to work out. Alaric moved to the windows that lined one wall, though they showed only darkness beyond the glass. I've ruled for 3 centuries, Victoria. I'm not used to uncertainty. But with you I find myself uncertain constantly, wondering if I'm doing this right. Doing what right? He turned back to face her, and the vulnerability in his expression caught her completely off guard. Courting you. The word hung between them. Old-fashioned and deliberate. Victoria's heart kicked against her ribs. I thought this was about business. It started as business. I genuinely did need a supplier. He crossed back to where she stood by the sample table, close enough now that she had to tilt her head to maintain eye contact. But the moment you looked up at me yesterday morning with tears in your eyes you were trying so hard to hide, the moment you held yourself together despite everything falling apart around you, I knew business wasn't the only reason I'd be coming back. You don't know me. I know you wake before sunrise to create beautiful things. I know you refuse to compromise your standards even when it costs you. I know someone is trying to destroy you and you're still standing, still fighting. His hand lifted slowly, giving her time to pull away, before his cool fingers brushed her cheek. I know I want to keep you safe and see you thrive and taste everything you ever create. Is that enough to start with? Victoria should step back, should remind him that she'd just ended a relationship, that she wasn't looking for complications, that dating a vampire king was so far beyond her experience, she didn't even have a reference point. But his touch was gentle despite his obvious power, and his eyes held hers with an honesty that Marcus had never managed. I fall fast, she heard herself say. I always have. I meet someone and I just know, and I dive in, and usually it ends badly. I've been alive for 300 years, Alaric said quietly. I don't fall at all anymore, or I haven't in longer than I can remember, until yesterday morning. So perhaps we're both taking the same risk here. This is insane. Completely. His thumb traced her jawline, sending shivers down her spine. But I found that the best things usually are. Will you let me court you properly, Victoria Turner? Will you let me prove that I mean what I say? She thought about saying no, about keeping this professional, safe, contained, but she'd played it safe with Marcus, had tried to be reasonable and mature, and he'd still ended up trying to ruin her out of spite. Maybe insane was better. Maybe falling fast with someone who caught her immediately was better than protecting herself from nothing. Yes, Victoria whispered. Court me. But I need you to understand something too. Anything. I won't hide behind you. If your court has a problem with me being here, with you choosing a human supplier, I need to prove myself on my own merit. I won't be someone you have to defend constantly. Alaric's smile turned fierce, proud. I would expect nothing less. Now, shall I show you the kitchens? I believe you have work to plan. The palace kitchens were spectacular, all stainless steel and professional-grade equipment that must have cost a fortune. Victoria moved through the space with growing excitement, testing the ovens, examining the mixers, running her hands over marble countertops perfect for pastry work. This was a setup most professional bakeries would kill for, and it was sitting mostly unused beneath the city. I could do anything here, she said, already mentally redesigning her production workflow. The convection ovens alone would cut my baking time in half. Alaric leaned against a counter, watching her with obvious pleasure. Then it's yours. Use it as much as you need. I'll have keys made and arrange for supply deliveries. What about your staff? Won't they mind me taking over their space? Our staff are vampires who primarily prepare blood for consumption. They'll be thrilled to have someone who actually understands how to cook food. He gestured around the kitchen. This was installed for human servants we no longer keep. It's been wasted space for decades. Victoria pulled out her phone and started making notes, ideas flowing faster than she could type. Seasonal menus, signature items, variations for different types of events. She could do a whole line of midnight-themed pastries, dark chocolate and blackberry, activated charcoal in the dough for dramatic black croissants, edible flowers crystallized in sugar, tiny perfect cakes that looked like jewels. You're already planning, Alaric observed. I can't help it. This is what I do when I get excited. She looked up from her phone, catching the warmth in his expression. What? You're beautiful when you talk about your work. Your whole face changes. Heat rushed to her cheeks. I'm covered in flour half the time, and I haven't slept properly in weeks. Still beautiful. He said it with such casual certainty that she couldn't even argue. When can you start? We have an event in 3 days, a reception for visiting diplomats. Nothing too elaborate, perhaps 40 guests. That's not much time. Is it too soon? I can postpone. No. Victoria cut him off, her mind already racing through recipes and timing. I can do it. It'll be tight, but I can do it. I'll need a final head count and any dietary restrictions by tomorrow morning. Consider it done. Alaric pushed off the counter, moving with that liquid grace that still startled her. I'll have my assistant send you all the details. For now, let me take you home. You need rest. I need to start prep work. Victoria, his voice carried gentle command. Rest first. Create tomorrow. The work will be better for it. She wanted to argue, but exhaustion was creeping in now that the adrenaline was fading. The past 2 days had been a whirlwind of disaster and impossible opportunity, and her body was finally catching up with her mind. Fine, but I'm coming back first thing in the morning. I'll have the car waiting at whatever time you specify. The drive back to her bakery felt different than the journey to the palace. Victoria watched the city pass outside the tinted windows, her sample boxes now empty beside her, her phone full of notes and plans. Somewhere in the space of 2 days, her life had completely transformed. She still didn't fully understand it, still couldn't quite believe any of this was real. Her phone buzzed with another notification, another review, another lie from Marcus. But this time when she read it, the words felt powerless. He was still trying to tear her down, still spending his energy on destruction, while she was planning menus for vampire royalty and being courted by a king who looked at her like she was precious. Marcus had already lost. He just didn't know it yet. The next 3 days blurred together in a frenzy of creation. Victoria worked in the palace kitchens from dawn until late afternoon when she had to leave before the vampires became too active. Alaric had assigned her 2 human assistants, college students who worked for the court part-time and understood discretion. With their help, she produced hundreds of perfect pastries, each one a small work of art. She made chocolate tarts with gold leaf and raspberry, tiny lemon cakes with lavender glaze, savory cheese puffs with fresh herbs, delicate cookies that melted on the tongue. Everything was elegant, refined, designed to impress diplomats who'd probably eaten at the finest restaurants in the world. Alaric visited the kitchen each day before she left, ostensibly to check on progress, but really, she suspected, just to see her. They talked while she worked, conversations that ranged from vampire politics to her childhood in Vermont to his memories of centuries past. He made her laugh with dry observations about courtly drama. She made him try her experiments, watching his reactions even though he couldn't properly taste food the way humans could. It's not about nutrition for us, he explained, sampling a new variation on her cardamom rolls. But we can still perceive flavor, texture, artistry. This is excellent, by the way. The cardamom is perfectly balanced. You're just saying that because you're courting me. I'm saying it because it's true. I don't lie about quality. He set down the pastry and moved closer until she could feel the cool air around him, see the way his dark eyes tracked her every movement. Though I will admit my judgment may be influenced by how attractive I find you when you're covered in flour and completely in your element. Victoria's breath caught. They'd been dancing around the attraction between them for 3 days now, keeping things professional in the kitchen, but the tension was building. Every accidental touch, every long look, every moment of standing too close added to the weight of it. The event is tomorrow, she said, her voice coming out softer than intended. I should probably maintain focus. Probably. But Alaric didn't step back. His hand lifted to her face, thumb brushing a smudge of chocolate from her cheek. Will you attend? As my guest, not just the supplier. I want you there to see your work appreciated. I don't exactly have appropriate attire for a vampire court reception. That's easily solved. I'll have options sent to your apartment this evening. Say you'll come, Victoria. Please. The please undid her. This powerful ancient being, asking rather than commanding, making himself vulnerable in a way she suspected he rarely did. I'll come, but only if you promise to tell me if the diplomats hate everything. They won't hate it. They'll be amazed. His certainty settled over her like a blanket. You're brilliant at what you do. It's time the world beyond your small shop understood that. That evening, 3 garment bags arrived at her apartment, each containing a dress that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Victoria chose the midnight blue one, simple and elegant, that made her feel like she could belong in a palace ballroom. She left her dark hair down for once, applied careful makeup, and stared at herself in the mirror trying to recognize the woman looking back. This time yesterday she'd been Victoria Turner, struggling bakery owner on the edge of failure. Tonight she was someone who created for vampire royalty, someone a king wanted to court. The transformation felt impossible, but the evidence was right there in her reflection. The car arrived precisely at sunset. The driver, a vampire she'd learned was named Thomas, offered her a rare smile. You look lovely, Miss Turner. His Majesty will be pleased. Is he nervous about tonight? Thomas's smile widened. I've served the king for 80 years. I've never seen him nervous about anything until he met you. So yes, I believe he is. That knowledge settled something in Victoria's chest. She wasn't alone in feeling out of her depth. They were both taking risks here, both choosing uncertainty over safety. The palace looked different tonight, lit up and humming with energy. Vampires in formal attire moved through the corridors, and as Victoria descended the main staircase, she caught sight of humans too, diplomats and guests mixing with the vampire court. The sight was surreal, but also strangely normal. Just people at an elegant event, regardless of species. Alaric waited for her at the bottom of the stairs. He wore a black suit that emphasized his pale coloring, his white hair pulled back to reveal the sharp angles of his face. When he saw her, something blazed in his dark eyes that made her feel beautiful and wanted and slightly terrified all at once. You're stunning, he said, offering his hand to help her down the last few steps. You clean up pretty well yourself. His laugh drew looks from nearby vampires, but he ignored them, tucking her hand into the crook of his arm. Come, let me show you what you've created. The ballroom had been transformed. Her pastries were displayed on silver platters arranged throughout the space, each presentation carefully designed to showcase the food like art. Human guests were already sampling items, their expressions showing genuine pleasure and surprise. Victoria watched a silver-haired diplomat bite into one of her chocolate raspberry tarts and close her eyes in obvious enjoyment. They love it, Alaric murmured near her ear. I told you they would. The night's barely started. Victoria, accept a compliment, accept success. You've earned it. Before she could respond, a vampire approached them, his expression severe. He had the same pale coloring as Alaric, but darker hair and eyes that held obvious disapproval when they landed on Victoria. Your Majesty, he said, his tone carefully neutral. Might I have a word? Alaric's arm tensed slightly under Victoria's hand. Counselor Draven, you're aware we have guests to attend to. This will only take a moment. Draven's gaze flicked to Victoria, dismissive and cold. In private, if possible. Anything you need to say can be said in front of Miss Turner. The counselor's jaw tightened. Very well, there are concerns among the court about the precedent being set tonight. Elevating a human to the position of royal supplier, bringing her into our most private spaces, displaying such obvious favoritism, it sends a message that some find troubling. Victoria felt her spine straighten. Troubling how? Draven looked at her like she was an insect who'd learned to speak. The court has maintained certain boundaries with the human world for good reason. We are not equals, Miss Turner. No matter how skilled you may be at baking pastries, these blurred lines create vulnerabilities. Counselor, Alaric's voice went cold, dangerous. You will speak to Miss Turner with respect, or you will leave this gathering. Those are your options. I mean no disrespect to the young woman herself. I simply question the wisdom. My wisdom. Now, Alaric's power filled the space around them, an almost physical pressure that made nearby conversations falter. You question 3 centuries of leadership because I've chosen to support exceptional talent. I question whether personal interest is clouding your judgment. Draven stood his ground, though Victoria could see the effort it cost him to face Alaric's anger. She's lovely, I'm sure, and her work is adequate, but making her our official supplier, bringing her to court events as your companion, this is about more than business, and the court sees it. Victoria felt her face heat, but before she could respond, Alaric stepped forward, placing himself slightly between her and the counselor. What the court sees is a king who recognizes excellence and refuses to let prejudice determine his choices. Miss Turner's work speaks for itself. Look around this room, counselor. Tell me those diplomats aren't impressed. Tell me we've ever had food of this quality at our events before. Quality is not the issue. Then what is? Be plain. Draven's expression hardened. You've made yourself vulnerable. You've given the human world access to our court through her, and you've shown clear favoritism toward a woman you barely know, which suggests she has influence over you. All of this paints a target on your back and on hers. The words hung in the air like a threat. Victoria felt cold wash through her, understanding clicking into place. This wasn't just about vampire politics or court tradition. This was about power, about people who saw her presence as an opportunity to undermine Alaric's authority. I can handle being a target, she said quietly. Both men looked at her, Alaric with concern, Draven with surprise. I've already got someone trying to destroy my business out of spite. At least here I know what I'm dealing with. You understand nothing, Draven said. This isn't fake reviews on the internet, girl. These are ancient beings with power you can't comprehend. If they decide you're a liability, if anyone in this court decides Miss Turner is a liability, Alaric interrupted, his voice dropping to something that raised goosebumps on Victoria's arms. They will answer to me directly. Are we clear, counselor? Draven held his gaze for a long moment, then bowed stiffly. As crystal, your majesty. I merely wish to voice concerns that others share but fear to speak aloud. I hope I'm wrong about the risks. He withdrew, disappearing into the crowd of vampires and humans. Victoria released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. That was intense. I'm sorry. Alaric turned to her, his expression torn between anger and apology. I should have anticipated this, should have prepared you better. You told me there would be resistance. I didn't think they'd be so bold about it, not at a public event. His hand found hers, threading their fingers together. Are you all right? Honestly, I'm angry. Victoria looked around the ballroom, at the vampires watching them with varying degrees of interest and disapproval. I've spent 3 days creating something beautiful, and they can't see past their own prejudice to appreciate it. That diplomat over there is on her fourth pastry. Those two by the window are actually arguing over the last lemon cake. But your counselor thinks my work is just adequate because I'm human. He's wrong. I know he is, and I'm going to prove it." She squeezed Alaric's hand, drawing strength from his solid presence. "You said I'd have to earn my place here. Fine. I'll earn it so thoroughly they won't be able to deny it." His expression shifted to something fierce and admiring. "You're extraordinary." "I'm stubborn. There's a difference." But she smiled despite herself, despite the tension and the watching eyes, and the sense that she'd just stepped into something far more complicated than a simple catering contract. "Come on, let's go talk to your guests. I want to hear what they actually think." They moved through the crowd together, Alaric introducing her to diplomats and allies with obvious pride. The responses to her food were universally positive, some guests even asking if she took private orders. Victoria fielded questions about technique and ingredients, falling into the comfortable rhythm of talking about her craft, and slowly the earlier confrontation faded to background noise. Until she saw Marcus. He stood near the entrance to the ballroom, somehow having gained access to the event, his familiar face twisted with an expression that mixed shock and rage. Their eyes met across the crowd, and Victoria felt her stomach drop. Of course he'd found out about this somehow. Of course he couldn't let her have even this one night of success. "Excuse me," she murmured to Alaric, pulling her hand from his before he could protest. She crossed the ballroom with her head high, aware of eyes tracking her movement but refusing to show weakness. Marcus waited for her by the doors, his casual jeans and hoodie completely out of place among the formal attire. "Victoria, fancy seeing you here." "How did you get in, Marcus?" "I told them I was your boyfriend. They seemed confused, said you were here with the king, but they let me through." His smile was ugly. "Imagine my surprise when I came looking for you and found you playing Cinderella with actual vampires. How long has this been going on?" "Not that it's any of your business, but I'm working. This is my job now." "Right, your job." He looked around the ballroom with obvious contempt. "Sleeping your way into royal patronage, that's a new low, even for you." The words hit like a slap, but Victoria kept her voice steady. "You need to leave. You're not invited here." "I'm not leaving until we talk about what you've done." "What I've done?" She almost laughed. "You mean building a business relationship with legitimate clients? Or did you mean something else, like maybe watching you destroy my reputation with fake reviews?" Marcus's expression flickered. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do. 15 fake accounts, Marcus. I've documented all of them. The writing patterns match your style exactly. You've been sabotaging my bakery because you can't stand that I'm successful without you." "You're not successful. You're a joke. That's why I had to—" He stopped, seeming to realize what he was admitting. "Had to what? Ruin me?" Victoria felt anger rising, hot and clean. "You couldn't control me, so you decided to destroy me instead. But it didn't work. I'm still here, still creating, still building something you could never touch. And now I have proof of what you did." "You can't prove anything." "I can, actually. IP addresses, writing analysis, timeline documentation. My lawyer says it's more than enough for a harassment and fraud case." She'd consulted a lawyer that morning, finally taking action instead of just absorbing the damage. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to stop. All of it. The reviews, the harassment, the showing up where you're not wanted. And if you don't, I'm going to prosecute you for everything you've done." Marcus stepped closer, his face flushing with anger. "You think you can threaten me? You think your vampire boyfriend is going to protect you?" "I think you should step back," said a cold voice behind Victoria. She turned to find Alaric there, and the expression on his face made her breath catch. He looked every inch the predator now, every inch the ancient king who ruled through power and fear. His eyes had gone completely black, and the temperature around them seemed to have dropped 10 degrees. "This is between me and Victoria," Marcus said, but his voice shook slightly. "Nothing involving Victoria is between you and anyone except me now." Alaric moved to Victoria's side, not touching her but radiating protective fury. "You're the former partner, the one who's been attempting to destroy her business." "She told you about that?" "She told me everything, including your campaign of harassment and fraud." Alaric's voice could have cut glass. "You should know that I take attacks on people under my protection very seriously." Marcus laughed, but it sounded forced. What are you going to do, bite me? This isn't some fantasy novel. You can't just... He stopped talking when Alaric moved faster than human eyes could follow, suddenly close enough to grab Marcus by the throat. Not choking, but holding him in place with casual, terrifying strength. Let me be very clear, Alaric said softly. Victoria has asked you to stop your harassment. You will comply. You will remove every false review you've posted. You will never contact her again, never come near her business, never speak her name except an apology. If you fail to do any of this, I will find you. And you will discover exactly what I can do outside of fantasy novels. Do you understand? Marcus nodded frantically, his face going pale. Alaric held him a moment longer, then released him so suddenly he stumbled backward. Leave! Now! Marcus fled, practically running from the ballroom. Victoria watched him go, feeling a complex mix of satisfaction and discomfort. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. Alaric turned to her, his eyes fading back to their normal dark color. He put his hands on you. He threatened you in my home. That's not acceptable. I was handling it. You were, beautifully. His expression softened. But you don't have to handle everything alone anymore. That's what it means to let someone court you, Victoria. It means sharing the burdens. She wanted to argue, to insist on her independence, but the truth was that watching Marcus run had felt good. Not having to fight that battle alone had felt good. Thank you, she said quietly. Always. He offered his arm again. Now, shall we return to our guests? I believe the Austrian ambassador wants your recipe for the chocolate tarts. The rest of the evening passed without incident. Victoria talked food and technique with diplomats who appreciated her craft, accepted compliments with growing confidence, and slowly began to feel like maybe she did belong here. Not as someone hiding behind Alaric's power, but as someone who'd earned her place through skill and determination. When the last guests finally departed near midnight, she helped supervise the cleanup, noting what had been popular and what she could improve for next time. Alaric stayed close, occasionally touching her lower back or shoulder, small gestures of affection that she found herself leaning into. "Walk with me?" he asked when the ballroom was empty and echoing. They strolled through the palace corridors, past rooms settling into quiet, until they reached a courtyard garden she hadn't known existed. It was built entirely underground, but lit by carefully placed lights that mimicked moonlight, full of night-blooming flowers and stone pathways that wound between beds of white roses and silver-leafed plants. "This is beautiful," Victoria said, touching the petals of a flower that smelled like jasmine and honey. "It was created for a queen 3 centuries ago. She missed the surface gardens." Alaric's voice carried old sadness. She never adapted to immortality. Eventually, she chose to walk into the sunrise rather than continue. "I'm sorry. It was a long time ago, but it taught me that immortality isn't a gift for everyone, that sometimes the people we love most can't stay, no matter how much power we have." He turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his cool grip. "I need you to understand something, Victoria. What's growing between us, it's real for me. But I'm also very aware of what I'm asking without asking. If this continues, if you truly become part of my world, it will complicate your life in ways I can't fully predict or control." "I know. Do you? Because tonight you saw a glimpse of court politics. But it gets worse. There are vampires who would hurt you to get to me, humans who would use you for access to our world, and that's before we even discuss the reality that I don't age and you do." Victoria's throat tightened. She'd been trying not to think about that particular complication. "So what are you saying? That we should stop this before it goes further?" "No." His grip on her hands tightened. "I'm saying I want you to go into this with your eyes open. I'm saying that if you choose me, really choose me, I'll protect you with everything I have, and when you're ready, if you're ready, I can offer you immortality. Not now, not soon, but eventually. The choice would be yours, always. But I need you to know it's a possibility. You're talking about turning me, making me like you. I'm talking about us having a future that lasts longer than a human lifetime, but only if that's what you want." Alaric raised her hands to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "I've fallen for you, Victoria Turner, completely and irrevocably, and I want you to have all the information before you decide if you can fall for me too. Her heart was racing so hard she could hear it in her ears. This was insane. They'd known each other for less than a week. She should be running, protecting herself, maintaining reasonable boundaries. But when she looked at Alaric in the ghostly light of the underground garden, when she felt the absolute certainty of his devotion, when she remembered the way he'd supported her work and defended her worth, Victoria knew she was already past the point of reasonable. "I already fell," she admitted. "I told you I fall fast. The first morning when you bought out my entire stock, when you looked at my pastries like they mattered, I started falling. And every day since has just made it worse." His expression blazed with joy and relief and hunger. Worse? Better, scarier, more inevitable. She stepped closer until she could feel the cool air around him, see the way his pupils dilated as she moved into his space. "I know this is complicated. I know there are risks in politics and 1,000 things that could go wrong. But I also know I've never felt like this before. Like I found something I didn't know I was missing." Victoria. Her name was a prayer in his mouth. "May I kiss you?" "Please." He kissed her like she was precious and necessary all at once. His lips were cool, but his passion was burning hot, centuries of control melting away as he pulled her against him. Victoria wrapped her arms around his neck, threading her fingers through his white hair, opening for him when his tongue traced the seam of her lips. He tasted like wine and something darker, something that reminded her he wasn't human, but she didn't care. She just wanted more. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Alaric rested his forehead against hers. "Stay tonight, not for anything except being together. I want to talk until sunrise, learn everything about you, make up for 300 years of not knowing you existed. I have to start baking at 3 a.m. Then I'll have you back by 2:30. Please, Victoria, stay with me." She should go home, should maintain some boundaries, keep some part of herself separate. But his eyes were full of hope and wonder, and she'd already decided to jump. Might as well enjoy the fall. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll stay." They spent the hours until dawn in his private chambers, talking and kissing and learning the geography of each other's bodies with careful hands and whispered discoveries. He told her about the centuries he'd lived, the changes he'd witnessed, the loneliness of immortality. She told him about growing up in Vermont, learning to bake with her grandmother, the dreams she'd carried to culinary school, and how small they'd become when reality set in. "They're not small anymore," Alaric said, stroking her hair as she lay against his chest on his massive bed. "You're creating for royalty now. Your work will be talked about in vampire courts across the continent. That's terrifying. That's success, and you deserve every bit of it." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "I'm going to make sure everyone knows how brilliant you are. Even the ones who want to dismiss you will have to acknowledge your talent eventually." "What if they don't? What if I can't win them over?" "Then they're fools, and I'll replace them with people who have better taste." He said it so simply, like restructuring his entire court was a minor inconvenience. "But it won't come to that. You'll prove yourself, Victoria. You already are." She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that this wasn't all going to collapse like everything else in her life had a tendency to do. But lying in the arms of a vampire king in an underground palace, watching dawn approach through windows that showed only darkness, Victoria felt something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. The next weeks fell into a rhythm that felt almost normal despite the supernatural elements. Victoria split her time between her bakery and the palace kitchens, building a routine that let her handle both regular customers and court events. The fake reviews slowly disappeared as Marcus removed them, though he never apologized directly. Her lawyer sent him a cease and desist that apparently scared him enough to comply with everything Alaric had demanded. Her bakery's rating climbed back up, and new customers started appearing, drawn by word of mouth about her work for private clients. Victoria never advertised her vampire connection, but somehow people knew. Her little shop became fashionable, a place where humans who moved in supernatural circles could get pastries that were served in royal courts. Mrs. Chen offered her a lease renewal with better terms. Victoria signed it with a steady hand, no longer afraid that everything would crumble. But the court remained a challenge. Alaric's counselors watched her with varying degrees of suspicion and disapproval. She overheard whispered conversations about the human who'd enchanted their king, about the precedent being set, about the dangers of letting mortals too far into their world. At formal events, some vampires refused to acknowledge her, treating her like a servant rather than Alaric's companion. She handled it by focusing on her work. Every event, she created something more spectacular than the last. Pastries that looked like jewels, cakes that defied gravity, flavor combinations that made even vampires who couldn't truly taste food pause in appreciation. She documented everything, refined her techniques, built a portfolio that spoke louder than any words. Alaric supported her completely, but she could see the strain it put on him. He was constantly balancing court politics, defending his choices, maintaining authority, while also showing favoritism toward her that his advisors found troubling. Some nights he came to her apartment exhausted, the weight of centuries showing in his eyes. "Tell me something good," he'd say, pulling her into his arms. "Tell me about your day, about what you created, about anything that isn't politics." She'd make him tea he didn't need to drink and talk about recipe experiments and difficult customers and the small victories of running a business. Slowly he'd relax, the tension leaving his shoulders, his smiles becoming real again. "You ground me," he told her one night, 2 months after they'd met. "I forget sometimes that there's more to existence than power struggles and ancient grudges. You remind me why any of it matters." "Does it matter?" Victoria asked. "The court politics, I mean. You're the king. Can't you just tell them to accept me and be done with it?" "I could. But ruling through fear alone is how kingdoms fall. I need their respect, their genuine loyalty, not just their obedience." He played with her hair, winding dark strands around his pale fingers. "They'll come around eventually. Your work is undeniable. And if it's not enough, then I'll make different choices about who sits on my council." His voice carried quiet steel. "I won't give you up, Victoria. Not for political convenience, not for tradition, not for anything. They need to understand that." The breaking point came during a major court gathering 3 months after Victoria had become the royal supplier. It was a celebration of the autumn equinox, one of the few holidays vampires still observed from ancient times. 200 guests filled the ballroom, including visiting nobility from European courts and several very old, very powerful vampires who'd come specifically to assess the king's new human companion. Victoria had created her most ambitious menu yet. A 7-course dessert progression that told a story of seasons changing, from summer berries to autumn spices to the first hints of winter darkness. Each course was designed to complement blood wines, and she'd worked with the court sommelier for weeks to perfect the pairings. Everything went perfectly until the 5th course. She was in the kitchen putting final touches on the plates when one of her assistants came running back, his face pale. "Miss Turner, you need to come quickly. There's a problem." Victoria followed him to the ballroom, her heart sinking as she saw the commotion near the main serving table. Alaric stood surrounded by angry vampires, his expression controlled fury, and on the floor at his feet was shattered china and spilled pastries covered in something that made her stomach turn. Blood. Human blood, fresh and bright red, pooling around her carefully crafted desserts. "What happened?" she demanded, pushing through the crowd. Councillor Draven stood near Alaric, his expression neutral, but his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "An unfortunate accident. One of the servers tripped and spilled blood wine all over the course before it could be served. Such a shame, especially given how much effort went into preparation." But Victoria could see it wasn't an accident. The way the blood was distributed, the timing, the specific targeting of her course while leaving others untouched, this was sabotage. "You did this on purpose," she said, looking directly at Draven. "I assure you, Miss Turner, I was nowhere near the serving table when the accident occurred." "But you arranged it, paid someone to do it, or ordered them, or however you manipulate people in this court." Her anger was building, hot and righteous. "You couldn't stand that my work was being praised, that even the visiting nobility were impressed, so you sabotaged it." "These are serious accusations," Draven said mildly. "Do you have proof?" She didn't. Just certainty and fury and the sick knowledge that he'd gotten away with it. Around them, the crowd of vampires watched with eager interest, like this was entertainment rather than someone's art being destroyed. "Councillor Draven," Alaric said, his voice dangerously quiet, "if I discover you had any hand in this, the consequences will be severe." "Of course, Your Majesty. I would expect nothing less. Draven's smugness was barely concealed. Though I must point out that these sorts of mishaps are perhaps inevitable when we rely on human contractors for important events. They lack the grace and coordination of our own kind. Perhaps this incident should encourage a return to traditional staffing arrangements. And there it was, the real goal. Not just to humiliate Victoria, but to use that humiliation as justification for removing her from the court entirely. Victoria looked at Alaric and saw him struggling with the same calculation. He could defend her, but without proof, it would look like favoritism. He could punish Draven, but that might fracture the council further. Every option played into the political trap that had been carefully laid, unless she changed the game entirely. "Give me 1 hour," Victoria said clearly, loud enough for everyone to hear. Alaric turned to her. "Victoria, 1 hour, that's all I need." She looked around at the assembled vampires, at the visiting nobility, at the counselors who wanted her gone. "This course was ruined, fine, but I have enough ingredients in the kitchen to remake it, and I'll do it right here, right now, in front of everyone. No hidden preparation, no chance for sabotage. You'll watch me create it from start to finish, and then you'll taste it and decide for yourselves if my work deserves its place in this court." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Draven's expression flickered with something that might have been concern. Alaric's eyes blazed with fierce pride. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "Yes, I do. This is how I prove myself." She met his gaze, drawing strength from his certainty in her. "Trust me?" "Always." "Then get me a workspace and let me show them what I can do." They cleared a space in the ballroom and brought in equipment from the kitchen. Victoria worked while 200 vampires watched, her hands steady despite the pressure, her mind focused entirely on creation. She explained each step as she went, breaking down the technique and artistry, making them understand the craft behind what she did. The pastry needed to be laminated perfectly, folded and rolled to create hundreds of delicate layers. The filling required precise temperature control to achieve the right consistency. The glaze had to be applied at exactly the right moment. Every step was crucial, and she executed each one flawlessly while her audience watched in growing fascination. Some of the vampires started asking questions. She answered them, explaining why she chose specific ingredients, how she developed flavor profiles, what made this particular combination work with the blood-wine pairing. Slowly, the hostile energy in the room shifted to something more like genuine curiosity. When she finally plated the completed course, presenting it on the same silver platters that had held the destroyed version, the ballroom had gone completely silent. Victoria looked at her work, at the perfect golden pastries glistening with glaze, at the artistic arrangement that echoed autumn leaves falling, and felt satisfaction settle deep in her chest. This was who she was. This was what she could do, and no amount of sabotage or political maneuvering could take that away from her. "Serve it," she said to the waiting staff. "Let them taste it and decide." The visiting nobility ate first, as protocol demanded. Victoria watched their reactions, saw genuine surprise and pleasure cross ancient faces. They didn't just eat the pastry, they savored it, discussing the flavors and technique with the kind of serious appreciation usually reserved for fine art. Then Alaric tasted it, and the look he gave her across the ballroom contained so much love and pride that Victoria felt her eyes sting with tears. Even Draven ate a piece, and though his expression remained neutral, he couldn't quite hide the fact that it was extraordinary. When everyone had been served, one of the visiting nobles stood, an elegant woman who'd been introduced as Lady Cassandra from the Viennese court. "Miss Turner," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the ballroom, "I've attended royal gatherings across Europe for 4 centuries. I've tasted the work of the finest chefs and artisans humanity has produced, and I can say without hesitation that what you've created tonight ranks among the best I've ever experienced." Other nobles voiced agreement, praise flowing from vampires who rarely complimented anyone. Victoria accepted it with as much grace as she could muster, trying not to let the relief and vindication overwhelm her. Draven remained silent, but when the gathering finally dispersed hours later, he approached her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "That was well done," he said stiffly. "Thank you." Don't mistake my acknowledgement for approval. I still believe your presence here is problematic. But he hesitated, and something almost like respect crossed his face. However, I can't deny your skill. You've earned at least that recognition. It wasn't friendship, wasn't even full acceptance, but it was a crack in the wall of resistance, and Victoria would take it. After the last guests departed, Alaric found her in the kitchen where she was helping clean up. He didn't say anything, just pulled her into his arms and held her tight enough that she could feel the tension finally draining from his body. "You were magnificent," he murmured against her hair. "I was terrified. You didn't show it. You stood in front of the entire court and proved them wrong about you." He pulled back to look at her face, cupping her cheeks in his cool hands. "I've never been more proud of anyone in my entire existence. Draven still hates me. Draven respects you now. That's actually more valuable." Alaric kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "You've changed things tonight, Victoria. Shifted the court's perception. It won't be easy from here, but it will be easier." She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that she'd turned a corner, that the worst of the political struggle was behind them. But exhaustion was crashing over her now that the adrenaline was fading and she couldn't quite manage optimism. "Take me home?" she asked. "Your apartment or mine?" "Yours? I don't want to be alone tonight." They went to his chambers and he helped her out of her formal dress, replacing it with one of his shirts that hung to her knees. They lay together in his massive bed, and she curled against his chest, listening to the steady silence where a heartbeat should have been. "I love you," Alaric said quietly into the darkness. "I know it's too soon. I know we're supposed to wait longer before saying things like that, but I don't care about supposed to. I love you, Victoria Turner. You're the best thing to happen to me in 3 centuries. Tears slipped down her cheeks. "I love you too. Even though you're impossible and ancient and come with the world's most complicated political situation. We're quite a pair. We really are." She tilted her head up to kiss him, soft and sweet and full of promise. "Stay with me until I fall asleep. I'll stay with you long after that. I'll stay with you for as long as you'll have me." It was a vow, and they both knew it. Victoria fell asleep with his arms around her, feeling safer and more cherished than she'd ever felt in her life. And for the first time since Marcus had started his campaign of destruction, she let herself believe that maybe everything really would be okay. The seasons changed, autumn sliding into winter, and Victoria's position in the court gradually solidified. She continued creating for royal events, each menu more ambitious than the last. The visiting nobles spread word of her talent, and soon she was receiving requests from other vampire courts, opportunities to cater events in cities she'd never seen. Her bakery thrived too. The combination of regular customers and her growing reputation brought steady business, enough that she hired 2 full-time staff members and started experimenting with expansion. Mrs. Chen mentioned the shop next door might become available, and Victoria found herself actually considering it, imagining a larger space, a full cafe, maybe even a teaching kitchen. Marcus left her alone, his silence the closest thing to an apology she'd ever get. She heard through mutual acquaintances that he'd left Seattle, moved somewhere overseas, starting fresh where no one knew about his harassment campaign. Victoria felt nothing about it except relief that that chapter had finally closed. Her relationship with Alaric deepened in ways that both thrilled and terrified her. They talked about the future more seriously now, about what it would mean for her to join his world fully, about the question of immortality that hung between them like both a promise and a threat. "I don't want to pressure you," he said one evening as they walked through the underground garden. It was snowing above ground, and somehow the palace systems had been adjusted to let a few flakes drift down into the garden, melting as they touched the night-blooming flowers. "But I need you to know that I've started the formal process of naming you as my consort." Victoria stopped walking. "Your consort. That's like queen. It's a recognized position in court hierarchy. It would make our relationship official in vampire politics, give you protection and status beyond just being my companion." He took her hands, his expression serious. "It would also mean you're committed to this life, to me, for as long as you choose to remain human. And if you ever decide you want immortality, the court would accept your turning without question." That's a huge step. It is. But we've been together for 6 months now, Victoria. I know my own mind, and I know what I want. I want you beside me. Not just for years, but for centuries. I want to watch you create and grow and become everything you're capable of being. I want to give you time to choose immortality without pressure, but also without uncertainty about my commitment. Her heart was racing. 6 months was nothing, barely a beginning in normal relationship terms. But then, nothing about this was normal. She'd fallen in love with a vampire king, had integrated herself into a supernatural court, had staked her entire future on this impossible connection. What if I say no? What if I can't do immortality, can't do forever? Pain flickered across Alaric's face. Then I'll love you for as long as you live, and I'll mourn you for far longer after. But I'd rather have whatever time you can give me than lose you now because I'm afraid of eventual loss. That's the most romantic and saddest thing anyone's ever said to me. It's the truth. He pulled her closer until she could see the centuries in his eyes, all the loss and loneliness he'd endured. You've brought light back into my existence, Victoria. However long it lasts, it will have been worth it. She thought about her grandmother, who'd taught her to bake and died when Victoria was 15. About all the people she'd loved and lost already in her short human life. About how grief was part of living, part of loving, and maybe trying to avoid it was just another way of being afraid. Ask me again in a year, she said finally. About turning, about forever. I'm not saying no, but I'm not ready to say yes yet either. I need time to really understand what I'd be choosing. Alaric nodded, though she could see the disappointment he tried to hide. Of course. Take all the time you need. But the consort thing, making us official in court. I'm ready for that. She smiled up at him, seeing relief and joy transform his expression. I love you, Alaric Petrova, and I want everyone to know it. He kissed her there in the garden under falling snow that shouldn't exist, and Victoria felt the last pieces of her old life fall away. She wasn't just a struggling bakery owner anymore. She was the vampire king's consort, a recognized member of an ancient court, someone who'd carved out a place in a world that had tried to reject her. The official ceremony happened 2 weeks later, a formal court event that required her to wear a gown that cost more than her car and stand before the entire vampire nobility while Alaric announced their union. It should have been terrifying, but with his hand in hers and the memory of everything they'd overcome together, Victoria felt only certainty. Counselor Draven himself presented her with the consort's chain, a delicate silver necklace set with black diamonds that marked her new status. He still didn't smile, but his voice held grudging respect when he welcomed her to her new position. The celebration afterward was magnificent, and Victoria had created a special menu for the occasion, pastries that represented the journey from her first meeting with Alaric to this moment, dark chocolate for the bitter start with Marcus's sabotage, lavender honey for the sweetness of new love, layers of complexity for the political struggles, and finally, a white chocolate finale dusted with edible silver, representing hope and future, and the choice she'd still have to make. Near midnight, when most of the guests had settled into conversations and the formal proceedings had relaxed into actual party, Lady Cassandra approached Victoria with a warm smile. Congratulations, my dear. You've accomplished something quite remarkable. Thank you, though I'm not sure what exactly you mean. You've reminded this court that we're more than just ancient politics and power struggles. You've brought creativity and passion and life into these halls. Cassandra's expression turned knowing. And you've made our king happy in a way I haven't seen in all the centuries I've known him. That alone is worth celebrating. Victoria looked across the ballroom to where Alaric stood talking with visiting nobles, and as if sensing her gaze, he turned and smiled at her with such open affection that her breath caught. He makes me happy too, she said softly. Then you've both won. Don't take that for granted, child. True love is rare enough among humans. Among immortals who've lived too long and seen too much, it's nearly unheard of. Treasure it. The words stayed with Victoria through the rest of the celebration and into the quiet hours afterward when she and Alaric finally retreated to his chambers. They made love slowly, tenderly, like they had all the time in the world, even though the question of forever still hung unanswered between them. I meant what I said earlier, Victoria whispered as they lay tangled together. about needing time, but I also need you to know that I'm seriously considering it, turning, immortality, all of it. Alaric's arms tightened around her. What changed? Tonight, watching everyone celebrate us, seeing how we fit together in your world. I started imagining what it would be like to walk away eventually, to grow old while you stayed the same, to leave you alone again after you've let yourself love me. She pressed her palm over his silent chest. I don't want that. I don't want to be the person who breaks your heart by dying. You wouldn't break my heart. You'd have given me years of happiness. But I could give you centuries instead. And I'm starting to think I want that too. I want time to master every baking technique that's ever existed. I want to see how the world changes, how food evolves, what new possibilities emerge. I want all of it, as long as I can have it with you. He kissed her forehead, her eyelids, her lips. Then we'll have it. When you're ready, when you're certain, we'll have forever. The year passed in a blur of creation and love and gradually dissolving resistance. Victoria's second bakery opened in the spring, this one built specifically to handle both her regular customers and her court contracts. It was larger, more efficient, and staffed by people who understood discretion about her unusual clientele. The reviews were universally glowing. Food critics praised her innovative techniques. Lifestyle magazines featured her as a rising star in the culinary world. And among those who knew about vampire society, she became known as the human who'd won a court's respect through pure skill and determination. Marcus's sabotage became a distant memory, something that had happened to a different version of herself. When she thought about him at all now, it was with a kind of detached pity. He'd tried to destroy her out of spite, and had accidentally pushed her toward something infinitely better than what she'd had before. Her relationship with the court had shifted too. Draven never became warm, but he stopped actively opposing her presence. Other counselors who'd been skeptical now sought her input on event planning, respecting her expertise. The younger vampires treated her like a fascinating novelty, constantly asking about human trends and modern culture. And through it all, Alaric remained her constant, her partner, her supporter, her love. They built a life together that spanned both worlds, her bakery and his palace, daylight and darkness, mortal craft and immortal appreciation. On the anniversary of the day they'd met, Alaric took her back to her original small bakery. It was evening, the shop closed for the night, but he'd arranged for it to be filled with white roses and candles, transforming the humble space into something magical. This is where it started, he said, taking her hands. This is where I walked in and found you refusing to give up despite everything working against you. This is where I fell in love. Victoria felt tears prick her eyes. I was such a mess that day. You were magnificent. You still are. He pulled a small box from his pocket, and even though she knew vampires didn't do traditional marriages, her heart still leaped when he opened it to reveal a ring set with a black diamond. I know we've talked about forever, about you taking time to choose. But I wanted to give you this regardless, a promise that I'm yours, whether you choose mortality or immortality, whether we have 50 years or 5,000. I'm yours, Victoria Turner, completely and eternally. She was crying now, happy tears that blurred her vision as he slipped the ring onto her finger. I've made my choice, she said. I want forever with you. Alaric. I want to be turned. I want centuries of loving you and creating with you and building a life that doesn't have to end. His expression blazed with joy so intense it was almost frightening. Are you certain? Truly certain? Because once it's done, I'm certain she'd never been more certain of anything. I've spent this whole year imagining both futures, and the only one where I'm truly happy is the one where I don't have to leave you. So yes, turn me, make me immortal, let's have forever. He kissed her then with a passion that spoke of relief and love and desperate gratitude. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Alaric rested his forehead against hers. When? He asked. Soon. I want to put my affairs in order first, make sure the bakeries can run without me for a while during the transition. But soon. She smiled up at him. How long does it take? The turning. 3 days of transformation after I give you my blood. You'll need to be somewhere safe and private, and I'll need to be with you the entire time to manage the process." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "It's not easy, Victoria. The change is painful, and there's always a small risk of rejection. I need you to understand what you're agreeing to." "I understand, and I still want it." She turned her head to kiss his palm. "I want you, and I want the life we can build together. That's worth any pain." "Then we'll do it. Whenever you're ready, we'll do it." She set the timeline for 2 months out, giving herself time to train her staff to handle the bakeries independently, to close out her lease on the studio apartment she barely used anymore since she spent most nights at the palace, to have final conversations with the few human friends who didn't know about vampires and deserved a proper goodbye, even if she couldn't tell them the whole truth. The night before her turning, Victoria stood in her original bakery one last time. She ran her hands over the counters where she'd rolled thousands of croissants, touched the oven that had produced her first perfect loaf of bread, breathed in the smell of flour and sugar and butter that had defined her human life. "Are you having second thoughts?" Alaric asked from the doorway. "No, just saying goodbye to this version of myself." She turned to face him, this impossible, beautiful being who'd chosen to love her. "Tomorrow I'll be different, stronger, faster, immortal. But I'll also lose something: the warmth of sunlight, the simple pleasure of eating my own creations, the human experience of mortality. You'll gain so much more. I know, and I'm choosing it willingly, joyfully, but I'm still allowed to mourn what I'm giving up." He crossed to her and pulled her into his arms. "You're allowed to feel anything you need to feel, and if you change your mind, even at the last moment, I won't." She silenced him with a kiss. "I'm ready, Alaric. Take me home and change me. Make me yours forever." The transformation was agony. 3 days of burning from the inside out as Alaric's ancient blood rewrote her biology, turning her from human to vampire one cell at a time. He stayed with her constantly, holding her through the worst of it, feeding her his blood when her body demanded it, whispering reassurances when the pain made her scream. But finally, on the 3rd day, the fire faded. Victoria opened her eyes, and the world looked completely different. Colors were sharper, sounds were clearer, and she could hear things that human ears could never perceive. The heartbeats of humans in buildings blocks away, the whisper of air through underground tunnels, the ancient, slow breathing of the earth itself. And she was strong. She stood from the bed where she'd suffered through the change and felt power coursing through her body, supernatural strength that made her previous human limitations seem like a distant dream. Alaric watched her with barely contained hope. "How do you feel?" Victoria tested her new body, moving faster than she'd ever moved before, feeling the grace and power that came with immortality. She looked at her reflection in the mirror and saw that her skin had paled to match Alaric's. Her dark hair now shot through with white streaks, her eyes holding new depths. She looked like a vampire. She looked like she belonged in this world. "I feel incredible," she said, and her voice came out different too, richer and more resonant. "Is it always like this?" "The intensity fades as you learn control, but the power remains." He approached her slowly, like he was afraid she might reject him now that she'd changed. Do you regret it?" "No." She closed the distance between them in a movement too fast for human eyes to track, pulling him into a kiss that held all her love and certainty. "I feel like I finally became who I was always supposed to be, like this was waiting for me all along and I just needed to be brave enough to claim it." Relief transformed his expression. "I was so afraid you'd wake up and hate what you'd become." "Never. I could never hate this, or hate you for giving it to me." She pressed her hand over his silent chest, feeling the answering stillness in her own. "We match now. Forever." "Forever," he agreed, and kissed her like he was sealing a vow. The next months were a new kind of education, as Victoria learned to control her vampire nature. She had to relearn everything about baking, adjusting to strength that could crush mixing bowls if she wasn't careful, speed that made her movements blur, enhanced senses that let her detect the slightest imperfection in texture or flavor. But it also made her better at her craft than she'd ever been before. She could work through the night when inspiration struck, could perfect techniques that required precision beyond human capability, could taste the individual components in complex flavor profiles and adjust them with supernatural accuracy. Her creations became legendary even among vampire circles. Courts across the world began requesting her work, and she built a reputation as the only vampire chef who still dedicated herself to mortal food. It was unusual, almost unheard of, but it was uniquely hers. 3 years after her turning, Victoria stood in her expanded bakery empire, now 5 locations across the city, watching her mostly human staff prepare for the day's opening. She'd learned to move among mortals carefully, hiding her nature, pretending to eat food she could no longer truly consume. But the work still mattered, still fulfilled her in ways that went beyond taste or hunger. Alaric found her there as the sun set, no longer a barrier now that she could walk in darkness without fear. Ready for tonight? They had a major court event, a gathering of rulers from around the world to discuss vampire politics and territory agreements. Victoria had designed a menu that would feed 200 immortal guests and twice as many human diplomats, a logistical challenge that would have been impossible before her transformation. "Ready," she confirmed. "The team knows what to do. We've got this." At the palace, the ballroom had been transformed into something spectacular, decorated for the occasion with an autumn theme that echoed the first major event she'd catered as a human. Looking at it now, Victoria felt the full weight of how far she'd come. From a struggling baker watching fake reviews destroy her dreams, to the vampire king's consort and the most celebrated supernatural chef in the modern world. It seemed impossible. It seemed like something that should have taken a lifetime. Instead, it had taken finding someone who believed in her worth before she fully believed in it herself. The event was a massive success, her food praised by visiting royalty, her techniques discussed with reverence by creatures who'd lived through centuries of culinary evolution. Counselor Draven, now genuinely respectful and occasionally almost friendly, publicly acknowledged her contribution to the court's reputation. Near the end of the night, Lady Cassandra approached her with a familiar warm smile. "You've exceeded even my high expectations, my dear, and you look radiant as an immortal. It suits you." "Thank you. I feel like myself for the first time in my life." Love will do that. Love and courage and the willingness to transform. Cassandra glanced to where Alaric stood talking with other rulers, then back to Victoria. "You've given him something precious, you know. Not just your companionship, but hope. He'd become somewhat cynical before you, jaded by too many years of the same political games. You reminded him why any of this matters. He did the same for me. Reminded me that my dreams were worth fighting for, even when someone was trying to destroy them. Then you've both won. Treasure it, darling. Not everyone gets a love story this good." After the last guests departed, Victoria and Alaric retreated to the underground garden where he'd first asked her to be his consort. It had become their place over the years, somewhere they could escape court politics and just be together. "I have something for you," Alaric said, pulling a folder from his jacket. Victoria opened it to find legal documents, titles, and deeds to a property she didn't recognize. "What is this?" "The building next to your original bakery. Mrs. Chen is retiring and selling her entire block. I bought it so you could expand however you want. A teaching kitchen, a cafe, living space, whatever speaks to you." His expression turned vulnerable. "I know immortality means you have time to explore thousands of interests, and I want you to know that I support all of it. You don't have to just be my consort or the court's supplier. You can be anything you want." Tears welled in her eyes, though they were different now, thicker and tinged with red. "You're giving me a building. I'm giving you freedom to keep creating, keep growing, keep being the extraordinary woman I fell in love with." He wiped away her bloody tears with gentle thumbs. "I never want you to feel trapped by immortality or by me. I want you to thrive. Victoria. For centuries. For millennia. For as long as forever lasts." She kissed him with all the love and gratitude and joy that filled her transformed heart. "I love you. I love this life we've built. I love that I get to keep creating and exploring and learning with you beside me." "Always beside you," he promised. "Whatever you want to do, wherever you want to go, I'm yours. For all of forever." They stayed in the garden until nearly dawn, making plans and dreaming about the future they'd have together. Victoria thought about her grandmother who'd taught her to bake, about young Victoria who'd just wanted a small shop of her own, about the woman who'd stood in an empty bakery watching her dreams crumble one fake review at a time. She wished she could go back and tell that woman that everything would not only be okay, but would be better than she'd ever imagined. That the destruction Marcus had caused would push her toward something infinitely more valuable than what she'd lost. That she'd find love and purpose and a future that stretched beyond mortal limitations. But maybe that woman wouldn't have believed it. Maybe she'd needed to walk through the fire to become someone who could accept this extraordinary life. Either way, Victoria was grateful for all of it. The struggles and triumphs, the pain and the transformation, the journey from human baker to immortal chef, from broken-hearted to eternally loved. She'd found her forever, and it was more delicious than anything she could have created on her own. 10 years after her transformation, Victoria opened her teaching kitchen in the expanded space Alaric had given her. It became famous as the only culinary school in the world run by a vampire, where human students learned techniques that pushed the boundaries of what was possible in food creation. She taught during evening hours, sharing knowledge accumulated over a decade of immortal experimentation. Her students went on to open restaurants and bakeries that brought supernatural precision to mortal cuisine. Some even ended up working for other vampire courts, spreading her influence across the world. Her relationship with Alaric only deepened with time. They traveled together, exploring courts and cultures across the globe. They built traditions, little rituals that were just theirs. Thursday nights in the garden, monthly visits to her original bakery, now historical landmark she'd preserved exactly as it had been. Annual recreations of that first lavender honey croissant he'd bought, though neither of them could truly taste it anymore. They talked about everything and nothing, their conversations spanning centuries of his experience and decades of hers. They made love like they had infinite time to explore each other, because they did. They built a partnership that balanced power and softness, ancient authority and modern creativity, vampire tradition and human innovation. And through it all, Victoria kept creating. Because that was who she was, who she'd always been, even before she'd fully understood it herself. She created beauty and flavor and art, and she did it not because she had to, but because she wanted to, because it brought her joy, because it was her gift to the world. Marcus became a footnote in her history, barely worth mentioning. His attempt to destroy her had failed so completely that it was almost funny. He had wanted to ruin her small bakery, and instead, he had pushed her toward a life of power and immortality and love that spanned decades and would span centuries more. She hoped he'd found whatever he was looking for in his life, but mostly, she just didn't think about him at all. 20 years after her turning, Victoria stood in her empire of bakeries and schools, watching young chefs experiment with techniques she'd pioneered, and felt profound satisfaction. She'd built something that would outlast trends and generations, something that combined her mortal passion with her immortal precision. Alaric found her there as the sun set, as he did most evenings, drawn to her like gravity even after 2 decades of marriage in all but mortal law. "Happy anniversary," he said, pulling her into his arms. 20 years. It feels like both forever and no time at all. That's immortality, but I wouldn't trade a single moment of it. Not even when I burned down half the palace kitchen experimenting with that new oven. He laughed, the sound rich and warm. Not even then, though my staff might disagree. They left the bakery hand in hand, walking through the city they'd made their home, and Victoria thought about how perfect her life had become. Not perfect in the sense of flawless, because there were still challenges and disagreements and moments of frustration, but perfect in the sense of right, of aligned with who she was and what she wanted. She had love. She had purpose. She had time to explore and create and become everything she was capable of being. And she had forever to do it all, with Alaric beside her every step of the way. That was more than enough. That was everything. The fake reviews that had once threatened to destroy her now seemed like the best thing that could have happened, because they'd led her here. To this life, this love, this impossible beautiful future that stretched out endlessly before her. Victoria Turner, once a struggling human baker, now an immortal chef and the beloved consort of a vampire king, had finally found exactly where she belonged, and she was never letting it go.